Hello, everyone. I'm just waiting a moment or two for everyone to actually be able to join the meeting, and then I'll begin. All right, everyone. It looks like we have everybody in our webinar, and I'm really excited to have this ready for you guys. Let's go over our agenda for the day, and then we'll begin with the really good stuff. So first thing we're going to do today is, hold on, that's wrong. Let's start this again. Hold on, glitch right here. One moment. Okay, let's start this all over again. Welcome. My name is Jason Lichtman, and I'm really happy to be able to be your host today for this webinar. The webinar is going to go over Fusion 360 and how you can use it to design laser cut things in your Glowforge. I am a Glowforge backer myself, and I'm super happy to be able to show you all of this today. So my background, by the way, is in mechanical engineering. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's in mechanical, and then I spent about a decade working in industry as a design engineer for consumer product design and development. I worked on a wide range of products, but primarily plastic consumer products. And I also have a little bit of a specialty in sporting goods, in particular helmets. I've designed helmets in bicycle, snow, baseball, hockey, lacrosse, motorcycle, and even snowmobile. Kind of the full gamut of sporting good helmets. And now my most recent interest is in laser cutting. And the Glowforge was supposed to be that exactly 2 years ago. 2 years later, I'm still waiting on my Glowforge. It's nearly here. And as a result, I thought this would be a perfect time to show everyone how they can use Fusion to actually make their laser cut products. So next thing on our agenda is going to be to get a little bit of a feel for who's out there in the audience. Now, by the way, I looked at the registration list and I saw a lot of names that I recognize from the forums. And so I'm really humbled to have all of you guys here. Some of you already have your laser cutters, your Glowforges already. Some of you don't, but from the ones that do, I am noticing a lot of names that I recognize of having posted some really cool projects. And so thank you for posting them, and thank you for being here today. So I'm going to launch a poll right here. Let's see if this actually works. It's going to ask you a couple of questions about your experience in different softwares. And by having the information you guys put in there, I'm going to be able to tailor the rest of the demo accordingly. I want to make sure that I started off at the right level and then actually address all of your questions and your needs. So please fill out all these questions real quick. It's only 3 questions. It'll be really fast. And then I'll end the polling and we'll actually get to the good stuff. Excellent. Thank you guys for filling this out. This is awesome. I'm going to let this last another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll get to the fun stuff. Ben, I apologize. I don't have SketchUp listed in the poll. Feel free to list that one as blank. All right, so I'm going to end the poll for now. Thank you guys if you've already voted, and if you haven't, I'm really sorry. I don't want to waste all of our hour on our polling here. There we go. And if you guys want to see the results, I'll share that with you right now. It looks like some of you, about 1/5 of you guys, don't use any CAD software at all right now, at least not in the 3D space. A lot of you are using CAD for only like 0 to 6 months. Some of you 6 months to 1 year. Not too many veterans out there right now. And then in terms of what software you guys are using, I see a lot of Fusion 360, and that is awesome. I love that. And then lastly, it looks like in terms of accounts, you guys, a lot of you aren't using Fusion at all, and a lot of you are hobbyists. That is awesome. All right, cool. So going back here, let's look at our agenda again. So we polled the audience, and now I'm going to give you your intro to Fusion. Then we're going to go over our intro to parametric CAD design, and then we're going to also go over a deep dive into sketching. And I know that sketching to a lot of you might not sound that interesting, but the reason I think it's so important is because it really is the foundation for all 3D modeling. Whether you're going to be using it for laser cutting or not, sketching really is that foundation. And so I'd urge you to consider really trying to practice your sketching. Try to learn as much about sketching as possible, because the advanced techniques really don't matter if you're not any good at sketching. Like, that's the real deal here. And then lastly, if we have some time, because I don't know how long this is actually going to take, if we do have some time near the end, I'm going to go over vector import and export. That's not supposed to say expert. That's supposed to say export between Fusion 360 and Adobe Illustrator. Now, I personally use Adobe Illustrator. I don't use Inkscape. I don't use CorelDRAW or any of the other softwares you might be using. So I am going to be talking about Fusion 360 and Illustrator that might or might not apply to you, but hopefully, even if it doesn't, you'll still learn from it. All right, so let's talk about Fusion. So let's bring up Fusion 360 itself. There we are. So the idea in general is you want to be able to take an idea, a design, and actually turn it into something that you can laser cut, you can manufacture. Maybe it's laser cutting, maybe it's 3D printing, maybe it's CNC machining. Either way, you're taking an idea and turning it into a physical thing. And CAD software in general is all meant to be able to help you do that, right? Fusion 360 is a CAD CAM software. It does CAD, meaning computer-aided design, and then it also does CAM, that's computer-aided manufacturing, all in one software. And there are a lot of benefits of being able to have both of those together. Now, it is a hybrid cloud product. Now, what does that mean, right? Because you've probably never heard of that term before. A hybrid cloud product means that it's a desktop application that you download and install on your computer, right? By the way, this will work on both a PC and a Mac, no problem whatsoever, whereas a lot of CAD software is only for PC. And this desktop client will work locally on your computer, whether you have internet or not. But if you do have internet, it's going to have extra powers, right? So it's kind of like being able to use your hardware on your computer to be able to do some of the calculations, but then whenever possible, we try to use the cloud to really give you superpowers, right? So one of those ways, for example, is your files, right? They're going to be stored in the cloud. When you hit save, it's actually saving locally on your computer, and then in the background, it's actually synchronizing to the cloud. Benefit there is that if for whatever reason your computer dies, you would actually have your access to your files no matter what computer you use, because your subscription to Fusion 360 is entirely based on your subscription. So here I can actually sign out or sign in. And when I sign in, all of my files are going to be readily accessible to me. And that's here in the data panel on the left-hand side. All right. Now, let's go and get started by showing you the different workspaces that we have in Fusion. And then I'm going to focus primarily on the modeling environment, where we're actually going to go and model up some cool stuff. So right now we are in the modeling environment. This drop down here is where you're going to see all of the different workspaces. So modeling is basically for 3D or 2D design of solid modeling, right? If it's 3D, it's going to be solid modeling. If it's 2D, it's just sketches. And if we're talking about surface modeling, that'll be here in the patch environment. If you're not familiar, surface modeling is when you're modeling something that doesn't have a thickness to it. It's not a solid object. It's allowing you to be able to do some pretty complex geometry that you couldn't do as a solid model, but it is an advanced technique. So for now, we're going to focus primarily on the modeling environment. We also do have the ability to design sheet metal components. We have the ability to make renders where you can make your product look like it's real before you actually make it real. That's pretty handy. This way, for example, for you guys, if any of you are considering to actually go out and produce your products and sell them on the internet, before you actually start making them, you can make your renders and gauge interest of your customers by going through the rendering environment. Animation is where you can make videos where it shows the part itself running, moving around the screen, or if you have an assembly, things exploding or being assembled. Simulation is where you can test, is this part going to break or not break when I bend it, or when I smush it, or when I smash it, all of those kind of things. CAM is where we go if you want to make tool paths for CNC machining. Now we also, by the way, do have the ability to make toolpaths for water jet cutting and also laser cutting, but there are some other ways that I'd recommend that I think are even better for the Glowforge in particular, but we'll address those in future webinars, right? I'm not actually going to be talking very much about exporting files today. This is going to be a 6-part series, and I want to make sure to address each of the topics one by one really well, so that all together, once you've launched all 6, you're going to have all of the tools and knowledge you need to be able to get out there and make really great things. Last thing is 2D drawings. And our 2D drawing environment will literally make manufacturing drawings. And again, you know, for your Glowforge, I don't think it might be the most useful. We're going to focus primarily on modeling. So once you're in the modeling environment, here's what I want you to pay attention to. The left side over here is where you're going to see all of your different components or parts. And you're also going to have folders for different things like bodies, canvases, which are basically images that you bring in for the background, sketches, which are all your sketches that you actually draw, and then down below you have all of those components that we talked about. Down below is what we call the timeline, and the timeline is really helpful, and this is where I'm going to introduce what we call parametric CAD, and parametric CAD is really when you take a sketch and you can use that sketch to make other 3D geometry, and you could always go back and edit your sketch. So this part here, for example, was created in all of these steps. These sketches were made, this image was brought in, this sketch was made, another sketch was made, then those sketches were turned into 3D things, and then more and more things were done. I can reorder any of these and change the result that ensues, and then I could also go back in time and see what things look like by going back in the timeline. And I'll go over that in more detail. I know that right now that might not make any sense to you. So let's go and start making something, and I think this will make more sense. So I'm going to create a new file, and we're going to make a very simple sketch. First thing I'm going to do is go and look into my origin folder, and that's going to show me this. Basically, I call this my 3D compass. So the same way if I look at a regular compass, so I can know where I'm pointing on a map, this is telling me where I'm pointing in 3D space. The origin is this white dot, and I want you to think of the origin as the center of this 3D world that I'm designing, okay? And I want you to think of these orange things as planes or flat surfaces, and each one represents a different thing. So this one here represents the front of my part. This one here represents the right view of my part, and this one represents the top view of my part. And if you're ever unsure which one is which, you can look in this upper right corner and you can see what we call our view cube. And if I click on front, it'll show me a front view. And now I could see this plane, what I call the front plane, perfectly face on, right? And if I wanted to look at another angle, if I clicked on right view, I would look at this from the right. I'm going to switch back to my other example, and then this will make more sense. Again, if I click the front view, now I'm looking at this from the front. If I rotate this slightly and click on the right view, now I'm looking at it from the right, and the same thing is true from the top. If you ever don't like the view that you're seeing and you want to rotate it, come back over here, and we have these little arrows that you can use to easily switch to different views and different angles and things like that. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to go and create a new sketch. So to make our new sketch, I'm going to pick the front view. And the first thing I'm going to do is right-click and say Create Sketch. Now, ultimately, I think you all are going to be making your products in a Glowforge. So the first thing I actually want to do is create a workspace that represents the bed of the Glowforge. And this way I know the scale of what I can fit and where, right? So I'm going to go into my Sketch dropdown. And this is where you're going to find all of their tools for sketching, right? So if you're talking about 2D stuff, you're talking about sketching, and you're going to be in this dropdown right here. Later on, when we get into 3D stuff, we're going to create 3D geometry right over here in this dropdown. And then once we've created 3D geometry and we want to modify it, then we're going to go under Modify and use those tools. And it can go a little bit more complex as you go to the right, but we're going to start here under Sketch. And I'm going to choose that I want to make a rectangle, and I choose that one right there. Now, I want the top left corner of my rectangle to be coincident, which is the word for in the same place as the origin of my 3D world. And I'm going to pull out a rectangle and say OK. So now I have a rectangle. Let's put some dimensions on this because I wanted to match the Glowforge. So I click the letter D on my keyboard and my mouse, my icon actually changed to something that has a little measuring thing on it. And if I hit escape, it'll go away. So let me try that again. I'm gonna hit D and now it looks like I have that icon. And if you don't know the shortcut and you haven't memorized it, you could also go under Sketch and then drop down to Sketch Dimension and you get the same result. Now I'm going to click on this line here. I'm going to move my mouse up and click again. And now I have a dimension. Now, I personally work in metric all the time. But just because I'm working in metric doesn't mean I can't put in imperial units. So I believe the bed on the Glowforge is 19.5 inches. So I type in 19.5 IN and hit enter. And notice that my rectangle became way bigger. So let's zoom out a little bit. So now I have a much bigger rectangle. Let's put another dimension on here. I'm going to go here and say that I want the height to be 11 inches. Type in 11 IN, hit enter. And now I have a rectangle that represents my Glowforge perfectly. So I'm going to hit stop. And what you're going to see in my timeline is that I created a sketch, and it's called Sketch 1. If I ever want to change that, I can right-click on it and say rename, and I'm going to change this to Glowforge bed. Okay, now I don't want to get too far into the nitty-gritty on dimensioning and actually designing a product yet. The first thing I want to show you is conceptually why I think designing in a CAD program like Fusion is so awesome. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to another program that's very well known in the industry called Illustrator. Here I have the same type of thing. I have my Glowforge bed set up as 19.5 inches wide by 11 inches tall, and I'm going to create a couple of rectangles. I'm going to create this rectangle here and this one. And now we're going to go and make some changes to it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to click this rectangle, and I'm going to set some dimensions. So let's say for a second that the width of this rectangle is going to be 40 mm, and I hit enter. So that's the rectangle. And the height of this thing is going to be, I'll call it 20 mm. Just a moment, 20 mm. Perfect. Now I'm going to take this one and let's set it to some different dimensions. This one's going to be, let's say, 80 mm, and then the height is going to be 60 mm. All right, perfect. So I have these two rectangles, and I'm going to move these so that they have a position relative to each other. Now let's say I wanted an exact position between these things. By the way, you probably noticed my Illustrator right now is set to inches, so I'm going to change that real quick, and then I'll be able to move on. So I'm going to change it to inches. There we go. Now everything, oh no, sorry. I said the exact opposite of what I wanted. I'm going to change it to millimeters because I like to work in millimeters. And now I want a spacing between these two rectangles. So the way I would do this in Illustrator is I'm going to click on this rectangle. I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to pick one of these three positions down below. And I'm going to see what the position is of this rectangle. And in this case, it's close to 90 millimeters. So I'm going to make it exactly 90. And now if I want this rectangle to be 20 millimeters apart, it's kind of a pain. I have to come in here and say that the Y position of the bottom edge is 90. Now I'm going to take this rectangle and pick the top edge, and I want that to be 90 plus 20. So now the result is that the distance between these is 20, right? And if I want, I can grab both of these together and I can move them together. But the challenge becomes when I want to make a change to the size of this box, it's not necessarily going to keep the distance the same. If I am smart enough to pick this bottom edge again, and then I change my height, it is going to stay exactly the same. But if I actually had this in any other setting and I change my height, then you're going to see that the spacing changes. And that can be really frustrating. But in a CAD program like Fusion 360, where we have what we call parametric modeling, it's all a little bit different. So let's try this again in Fusion. So I'm going to make a rectangle. And I believe I'm going to try to do the same dimensions as before. So I think I did 40 wide, and I think I did 20 tall. And notice this time it actually puts real dimensions on my rectangle. And I'm going to make another rectangle, and I'm going to set these to be, I think this one was 80 wide and maybe 60 tall. And if I'm not exactly right, it doesn't really matter because my concept here is the same. because now I can put a dimension between these and say it's going to be 20. Now the cool part is now that I've done all of that, I've set my dimensions, I can actually take this thing and no matter where I drag it up and down, the other box is always going to come with it. And if I, for example, I'm going to fix this one in space and now I change the dimension here to something like 30, you're going to see that the box is going to change in size and height, but the relative position of one box to the other is always going to stay the same. And that's again because this CAD system is going to always know the relative position using those dimensions. Now it gets better than that because this is really a simple case. I know I said this all fast, but this is, by the way, all going to be recorded. So if I am going a little too fast for you, keep in mind you could always rewatch this. But here's where it's going to get really cool. I'm going to go back to Illustrator, and now I'm going to draw a pretty crazy shape. Actually, no, we're actually going to keep it simple. We're going to keep it as these boxes. So let's say I take this top box, and I want to make an offset, right? So for example, right, maybe this is like a name badge, and I love this shape, and I want to make the name badge have like a score, just slightly offset from the exterior. I can come in here and say Object, Path, and I could, let's try it again, Object, Path, Offset, and I can preview it. So now you can see a preview. And this time I want the preview to go inside, right? So we're going to change this to -2 millimeters, let's say. And now I can see an inside box. But here's the catch. With a program like Illustrator, and I believe also Inkscape and CorelDRAW and some of the other vector 2D programs, if I now change the exterior box, right, whether I make it wider or I move it, the offset on the inside doesn't change, right? It stays exactly where it was. And that can be a problem because I want to be able to change my design and have everything update automatically. That is the key to parametric design. So let's do the same thing in Fusion. I have this box right over here, and I'm going to go into Sketch, Offset, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to drag this in, and now I have it as 2 millimeters. If I move the exterior box, the inside is going to go with it. If I change the dimensions of the exterior box, the inside is going to go with it. Now, I don't want you to think that that's true only for simple boxes, right? Because I can make some pretty complicated geometry. I'm going to do this. It's called a spline, by the way, and it's a math term for a complex shape that you can manipulate pretty crazy, like this. And I'm going to do the same kind of offset. I say Sketch, Offset, and I'm going to drag this in by 10 millimeters. And even if I go and I move the shape of my box, my blob really, everything on the offset is going to update too. Now the same is true for 3D as well, right? So if I take my 2D sketch and I turn it into a 3D shape, hold on just a moment. I'm going to hide my Glowforge, there we go, my Glowforge bed, and now it's a little bit easier to pick stuff. If I make this shape into a 3D thing, right, I can go back and edit my original sketch and it's going to update the 3D as well. So not only is it going to update the shape of the outside, it's also going to update the inside. I could change this to 15 millimeters now, and when I say stop, the 3D shape updates also. That is really the power of parametric design. And so in this case, it's really simple, right? I have a sketch for the Glowforge bed. Then I made a sketch for these rectangles and the shape, and then I turned it into a 3D thing. But just imagine for a moment that if you have a complicated thing like this, you can still go back and edit your sketches, and everything is going to update automatically. And that is really, really cool. So I've been probably boring you on a little bit of this, and so let's go and make something practical. And I think you'll see this in action. So I'm going to go and make a new design, and I'm going to make, let's see what we're going to make. So I went to a store the other day, I think I went to Target or something like that, and I saw these plastic hangers that go on your closet on like the pole that holds all your clothes, and it divides different areas of your closet. And I thought to myself, you know, even though I saw this and it was meant for the kids section, to divide like long sleeve shirts versus short sleeve shirts, I thought to myself for my coat closet and when you first get into my house, this thing would be absolutely perfect to divide, you know, my coat from my wife's coat, from my kid's coat, to maybe like an area for my guests. So let's actually go and make that. So I bought one of those things and I put it in my scanner and I now have an image of it. So I'm going to come in here and we're going to trace that image and we're going to use that to actually sketch and practice our sketching. So I'm going to come in here under Insert, and I'm going to choose to insert a canvas. And that's what we're calling a background image. So I pick that, and it's going to ask me now, where do I want to put that image? So I can choose, do I want to put it on the right plane? Do I want to put it on the front plane or the top? And this is arbitrary. You know, this is your choice, and I'm going to choose to pick the front. So I pick the front plane, and now I get to pick my image. And I'm going to go in under my laser cutting folder, and I have this thing called closetdivider.png. And notice that, you know, it came in really small. So I can scale this thing, and I can actually move this around. I could place this wherever I want. Let's look at this from the front view, by the way. Now this looks a lot cleaner. So I'm going to place this where it is right now. And now I have to decide for myself how big that image really should be. Now we have a really cool tool in Fusion that I love. So if I go under Canvases, that's the folder here for all of my background images, I can right-click on my image and choose Calibrate. Here's how Calibrate works. I pick any two images, like the left side of this thing and the right side of this thing, and our software is going to automatically calculate the distance between it. So right now, the image happens to be 84 millimeters across those 2 points. And in this case, I measured my actual part, and it looks like I want it to be about 80 millimeters. Now, if you happen to be using Imperial, that's about 3.125 inches or 3 1/8. And you could type that in as 3 1/8 if you really want to, or 3.125 IN, that would be the best way. And so I type that in, and now it scales it to the right size. But now I want to place this in the right position. So I'm going to right-click on this again and say Edit Canvas. And now I'm going to be able to move this thing into a new position. And this doesn't have to be perfect. I'm really ballparking this, and you know, it doesn't really matter how perfect it is. You could always adjust it later. But I'm trying to make it so that the origin, remember I said earlier, that's the center of my world, is the center of this circle, because I think that'll be convenient, right? But it doesn't really matter. I can sketch this no matter where it is. And I'm going to say OK. Now I'm going to go and create a new sketch. Right? And by the way, remember we talked about our timeline. It created a feature here called Canvas of Closet Divider. So now I'm going to go and pick the same face or the same plane. And I'm going to right-click and say Create Sketch. And we're going to make a new sketch. And now here's where it gets really fun, because all I have to do is trace this thing. So I can do it any number of ways. But I'm going to make this really simple for myself. I'm going to go under Sketch, Line, and I'm going to click around here, and then I'm going to drag down, and then I'm going to hit Escape. Then I'm going to try again. I'm going to say Sketch, Line. I'm going to pick from here to here and hit Escape. So now, by the way, I have 2 lines, and I could drag these anywhere I want. So if I didn't put them in the right place, I can still move them a little bit. And I want you to notice that there's a little icon on the right side of the line. That icon is showing what we call a constraint. And a constraint is saying, what kind of like rules do you want to apply to this line? So do you want the line to always be vertical, or is it okay for it to not be? Well, this particular icon is the vertical/horizontal constraint. So if I want to rotate this line, I can't right now. If I grab this thing and I drag it, it's just going to move it. But if I get rid of that constraint, I can click it and hit delete. Now I actually can drag this thing and make it any angle I want. But in this case, I actually do like it that it was vertical. So I'm going to hit Control-Z and undo, and now I have my constraint again. Then I'm going to go under Sketch and say I want to make an arc, right? I'm going to pick a 3-point arc. So I'm going to start by clicking the first point. That's the end of one of the lines. Then I'm going to go to the other end and click there. And then I'm going to drag and click one more time. And notice that I'm already getting pretty close to the original design. Oh, and I don't know if you guys noticed this, but over here, a new constraint popped up. A little thing that's a circle with a line next to it, and that's called a tangency constraint. And that's basically saying that this line, this one over here, and this arc are tangent to one another, which basically just means smooth relative to each other. And that's awesome. Now, I'm noticing that my background image is a little dark, and I want to actually be able to fix that. So I'm going to hit Stop Sketch, and I'm going to go back here and right-click on my canvas and edit it. And I'm going to change my opacity down a little bit. And I'm going to also check this box here called Display Through. That means that when you make something 3D, that you can actually see the image through your 3D thing at all times. I like it. I think it's really handy. So I turn that on and say, OK. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit the sketch one more time. Again, you know, I'm actually making these mistakes on purpose and going back and forth quite a bit because I want you to see how easy it is to go back and edit things. Now, I do have a couple of questions that came in here. I want to make sure to address them. Dan asked, does the Calibrate Canvas tool have any option to snap placement points to portions of the imported image? The answer to that is no, right? Because the way it works is when you select 2 points when you're doing your calibrate, it's really just 2 points that you're clicking with your mouse, and it doesn't know what like the image is of. It doesn't know that it's a coat hanger divider thing, or it doesn't know that it's like a Lamborghini sketch or a hand sketch or a Christmas ornament. It has no idea. So really you're just visually placing, you know, clicking in one spot and clicking in another, and it's measuring the distance between those 2 points. So in my case, by the way, when I wanted to measure the width to be about 80, I'm trying to make the second point about horizontal relative to the other. You know, if I clicked 1 point up top and then 1 point down below, my measurement would be at an angle, and that wouldn't be really helpful. All right, cool. So I imported my image, and now I started to sketch on top of it, but we're not done here, right? I need to do the bottom, but I'm also noticing that I don't have all my constraints that I want. I have a really sharp edge between this arc and this line. So I can actually come in here and hold Control and pick the second line. And now I can go into my sketch palette and I can choose what kind of constraints I want. Now I know none of you guys can talk in the audience, but I want you to think to yourself, what constraint do I want over here? And I have a hint for you, right? On the left side, between this line and this arc, I wanted a tangency constraint. I would probably want the same thing over here. And so I'm gonna go over and pick tangent, and now an icon shows up, and you can see that everything looks really smooth, that it didn't look smooth before. Let's do this thing down below as well, and then we'll clean this up and be ready to go. We're going to go under Sketch. We're going to say I want an arc, a 3-point arc from here to here, right? Or vice versa, it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to drag it, and it looks pretty darn good. But we can go and clean this up, right? Tangency automatically applied from this line to this one, but it didn't apply here. So I'm going to choose those two, choose tangent, and now everything is looking great. But just like before, if I hide my original image, everything looks blue, right? And because it's blue, it means that I could drag this around and mess with it quite a bit. But we want to apply some dimensions and constraints. We're going to apply both. A colleague of mine tells me that you want to try to apply as many constraints as possible and then apply your dimensions. And so we're going to try to follow that rule. First thing I want to do is set a center line, right? Because that might make my life a little easy. So I'm going to hit Sketch, Line, and I'm going to go up to the top of my arc, and you see that triangle that showed up at the top? That's telling me that I just hovered over the exact center of my arc. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want. And now I'm going to drag down, and I'm intentionally dragging a little further than the bottom. Now you probably noticed that this line I made is solid, like it looks just like all the rest of them. And now that I put a line in here, I can actually hover over 2 different areas of my closet hanger thing. But I actually don't want to split it in 2. Really, I want this line in the middle to just be a center line. Now in Fusion, we call center lines construction lines, and we show them as dotted lines. So I'm going to click on this thing, and I can go over here to construction. I'm going to show you that a little bit clearer with that blinking thing. And I hit construction, and now it turns into dotted. And when I hover over this thing, I only get to see the entire thing. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want. Now I do want to trim this. You see how it extends a little bit past? So I get to introduce now a new tool called the Trim tool. I go under Sketch, Trim, and I can just pick here, and the red that's highlighting is previewing what's going to disappear now, and it deletes it. Perfect. So now I have a center line, but I could still move this thing around, right? So let's go and I click on the center line, I click on the origin. I'm holding Control in between, by the way. I forgot to mention that. So I select both of them at the same time, and I'm going to choose coincident. And if I want you to think to yourself, what's happening now? So I told you earlier that coincident means that they're going to be on top of each other. And if I highlight the line and the origin and I choose coincident, my sketch is going to immediately snap to that center line. So that's perfect. Now I can't move the center anymore left to right. I could still move it up and down. I can't move it left to right. Let's lock down the width, right? Right now I can move this thing left to right quite a bit. Sorry, I can drag this thing and change the dimension. But I told you that I measured my actual closet divider and it was going to be 80 millimeters. So I can come in here, choose those two lines and set it to 80. Now, if I hide my canvas, I want you to notice that the lines on the side now turn black. And they turn black because I can no longer drag them left or right anymore. Because those lines are locked in place based on the constraints of this dotted line and the dimension. That's pretty darn awesome. Let's do the same thing with the overall height. I'm going to click on the, let's try it again. I'm going to click on the very top and the very bottom, and I'm going to drag this out. And I measured my real part, and the real part was 152 millimeters. So now I have that locked. But it shows as blue, and it's because I can still move this up and down. So let's look at my original, and let's drag this, and I'm noticing that the center of my origin, which lines up with the circle, also lines up with the center of this circle. So if I drag that center of the circle of this arc to the origin and I let go, it's going to snap in place. And I know it's going to do that because there's a tiny little blue box that hovers around my origin when I hover near it. Now that was really small, so I'm going to try that again. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. Let's zoom in and see if you could see it better. I pick the center of my arc, and when I come near the origin, a little blue box shows up around my origin and lets me snap to it. And now that I've done that, here's what's so awesome. My entire shape actually turned black, and now I can't drag it anymore. I can change the dimensions. If I wanted this to be bigger, or longer rather, I can do that. If I wanted this to be wider, I can do that. And it's really easy. All I do is change the dimension. Let's go back and finish this off, right? Well, notice, by the way, that my image is totally misaligned, right? So let's go and we can actually move that around, and then the rest will be easier. So I'm going to go and take my canvas, and I'm going to move my image, and I'm going to move it down just a little bit. There we go. And now it much more closely resembles the original. And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Because ultimately, this is my design. It doesn't have to be anyone else's. And I'm just using the scan that I used as like a background example so that I know where I want to end up. So I have everything looking good. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to edit my sketch again. And let's put in that circle. All right, so I'm going to put in my circle right over here. And I'm guessing, you know, I'm kind of dragging this out. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but I measured the real one. So I'm going to put in a dimension here. And hold on a second, there we go. I'm going to click on this circle, pull a dimension, and I measured 38 millimeters. So there I have it. Showing my canvas, and this is already looking really great. But now maybe I want to set a distance between the top of the circle and the top of this part. Well, that's really easy for me to do. Right now, though, if I grab the circle and I grab the top, the measurement is automatically from the center of the circle to the top. But I want the top, right? The top of the smaller circle, that is, to the top of the bigger. So I'm going to need to add new geometry. So here I get to introduce a concept called points. I'm going to go under Sketch and add a point. And I'm going to put that point on the circle. I just dragged and clicked. And then I'm going to say I want this point to also be on my center line. Now this thing is locked in to the top of the circle, but I can drag it, right? Now I can also click on the top of that point, right, which is the top of the circle, and this one, and come in and put a new dimension. Oops, I clicked wrong. Let's try that again. 30. And now I have this thing looking really great. Cool. We only have one more part left, and we can make it more detailed or we can move on to new things. In the chat window, by the way, under the Q&A area, please give me some feedback so I know if you want me to keep going in more detail here, if you want me to move on to something more interesting. You know, just put in a comment as though it were a question, tell me move on or stay on this. And while you're answering that, I'll stay on this in the meantime. We only have one more section here. Let's see here. I'm going to add this little cutout. Right? So for the cutout, I want to make 2 lines. Now I have 2 ways to do that. I'm going to show you both ways so you guys know how to do it different ways. The first is I'm going to draw 2 lines. I click on Sketch, Line, and I'm going to put in a line like that. And notice I did not do a good job. That's totally fine. I'm going to draw another line, Sketch, Line, and this one is weird. You know, I did a bad job. It doesn't match at all, but that's okay. Because remember we talked all about constraints and how constraints force things into doing what you want it to do? So check this out. I'm going to pick this line, hold Control, and pick the second line. And then I'm going to go into my sketch palette, and I'm going to say I want these to be parallel to each other. And now they're automatically going to be parallel to one another. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim these a little bit, right? Because if I get rid of my canvas, you can see that I don't need this chunk over here. I don't need this chunk. I don't need that. And I don't need that. So I'm going to say Sketch, Trim. Or notice I have this little shortcut. I could hit the letter T. So I'm going to hit the letter T on my keyboard. I'm going to pick this area. Again, the red is previewing what's going to disappear. Hit the red over here. Hit the red over here. Hit the red over here. And now I'm looking really good. Now, if I want to exit out of this tool, I hit the Escape key. And now I'm looking awesome. Let's also start to realign this thing. So I'm going to move this thing over here. And I'm going to move this part. And it's still, you know, notice, by the way, even when I grab these corners, it doesn't really change the angle too much. Like sometimes it does. It kind of works a little weird. So I have a little trick for you. I'm going to hit Control Z and undo that. Here's my trick. Move one area of the line to where you like it. Right-click on it and say Fixed. See how this, like there's a lock button that says Fixed or Unfixed? Anything that's fixed in Fusion is going to turn green. So that point, I'm going to try to zoom in, it's not going to get very big, but there you go. It's green, and it's not going to move. And because that doesn't move, when I grab this other end, it's going to let me drag it. Hold on, let me try it again. It's going to let me drag it a little bit easier to be wherever I want. There we go. So now that I have this one where I want, I could fix that one as well, but I actually like where this is. I'm going to click on the original, and I'm going to right-click again, and I'm going to unfix it, unlock it, and the green dot goes away. Now, you're probably wondering to yourself, like, why did I bother fixing it and then unfixing it? I just wanted the positions to be kind of where I wanted it, but here's the cool thing. I love the constraints and the dimensions. When you fix it in space, it really locks it in, and then I'll tell you what would happen. If you change the dimension, like the width of this part, this thing is going to yell at you. You're going to get all these errors because that point was locked in space. But then when I change the dimension here, it's trying to like change something that can't be changed anymore. So they're going to fight each other. And so I don't like to do fix or the fixed like lockdown for very long. I try to just use it as my setup. I hope that explains why I only use it temporarily. So one of the ways I can make constraints here is I'm looking at this line and I'm seeing that the line looks like it goes through the center of my circle. So I could actually pick this line, pick the center of the circle, and say coincident. And now what's going to happen is that when I move my line, it's always going to stay coincident with the middle. And it turns out I made a mistake. I was wrong. I thought that it was, that's how the geometry worked out, but I don't think that was exactly right. So I'm going to undo that. We have unlimited undo, so you could just hit undo quite a few times. And let's see what we're going to do instead. Instead, we're going to dimension from this line to this one, and that makes an angle. And it looks like it's about 65 degrees. So I'm going to say that's cool. And then I'm going to make a distance maybe from here to here and say it's about 5.675. I like to get rid of a bunch of extra decimal places that I don't need. And now actually I have everything locked down, right? It turns out that by dimensioning this point and this angle, that's all I need to figure out this geometry mathematically, right? So I don't need to do anything else. Now you're probably noticing, by the way, that what we've been doing so far is not very artistic, right? It is very math-based, and that's cool, right? Illustrator is really great at a little bit more of the artsy stuff. Fusion is even better at kind of the more engineering stuff. It also does some of the artsy stuff, but you have to do it a little differently. And today I'm focusing on the engineering side, like these constraints and the dimensions. But on other webinars, like webinar 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I'll be able to show you the other ways to do it as well. But let's keep on going for now because we're doing great. I might have a dimension between this line and this line that I want to keep. Because if I don't have that, then maybe this thing won't be flexible enough. So I put a dimension and I measured the real one. The real one is 3.15 millimeters. And now I have that shape. Perfect. Now, here you have two choices. Oh, by the way, another shortcut to have done the same thing like I did before, if I automatically wanted to like parallel lines and everything, is if instead of drawing two separate lines, I could also go under rectangle and choose a 3-point rectangle. And I'm going to click 1 point, click 2 point, and another. And it basically draws the same thing, in which case I would just delete the ends of it. And I end up with two lines that are already parallel to each other. It's just a little shortcut in case that helps you guys. So now that I have this geometry, let's go and turn this into a 3D thing, right? Because that's what I've been talking about all along. This is where it gets awesome, turning a sketch into a 3D thing. So Fusion 360 interprets your sketches and figures out what the profiles are. So based on what I sketched so far, I have 3 different options. I have this profile here that's highlighting in blue. I have a profile in the middle, and I have a profile over here. I can choose multiple of these at the same time if I want, including all 3. So I'm going to show you all different options that you get depending on what you pick. So right now I have all 3 picked, and I choose extrude. Extrude is just an easy way to drag something in one direction to make it 3D. So I'm going to say OK, and this is the result. But this isn't what I wanted, right? This isn't a coat hanger divider thing. So let's go back and edit it. I'm going to right click and say edit. And in my profile, you see how I chose 3 profiles? I'm going to hit X to delete them, and let's pick something else. If I pick just the circle, I'm going to end up with this. If I pick instead the circle and, let's try it again, I'm going to hold Control and add this little sliver, I end up with that shape, right? And I'm going to do the opposite now, and I'm going to say instead of that, let's hit the X, I want this shape. And now I have a coat hanger divider thing. But this is way too thick, right? Like clearly that's not going to work. At the very least, I'm not going to be able to bend it to be able to put it on my coat rack. So I'm going to come in here and right click and say edit feature, and I'm going to choose a thickness that's the thickness of my material, maybe 3 millimeters. Now, by the way, this is going to be a shortcut for you guys for later. If you ever want to have this, if you're using the same thickness time and time again, here's a trick. Go under Modify, Change Parameters, and this is basically a parameter table. That's a fancy word for saying like this is a list of dimensions you use all the time. And I'm going to hit this green button, and I'm going to call this thing proof grade thickness. And I'm going to type in the number 3 for 3 millimeters. So basically, if everything I do in this model is 3 millimeters, instead of having to type in 3 every time, and if I want to edit my thickness, have to go and find all the dimensions that were set to 3 and change it to something else, instead, I can come in here, and instead of picking a number, I can actually come in here and type in proof grade thickness. Before I even typed in very much, I could see that dimension right here. What that means is that if I go back under Modify, Change Parameters, and I change this to 5 millimeters, or I'm going to make it 50 just to really exaggerate this, now you can see that the 3D model updates also. So that's pretty cool. So for example, if I made one coat hanger like this, and then now by the way, I've been doing all of this. I know it might seem like I've been going really fast, but I've been doing this really slowly for the purpose of this webinar. But if I wanted to do all of this really fast, I can do it like this. So I'm going to go and pick another rectangle. I'm going to make a circle. And notice how quickly you can actually take this thing and make this into geometry that's really usable to you. And I'm doing this a slightly different way than before, just to show you that you can do things redundantly. And it all comes together really, really fast. By the way, feel free to ask questions. If you guys have questions, that's totally cool. I have no problems answering questions while I'm going. Cool. And I believe we set this to 80 millimeters. And I believe we set, let's see, we're going to put a line from over here to over here. And we're going to take that line and turn it into construction. We're going to dimension the whole thing over to 152. We're going to take this thing and turn that into 38. And now very quickly I have another coat hanger here. And I think you get the idea. Cool. So I'm going to stop this one and I'm going to thicken this one as well. And this is a slightly different one, of course, right? The dimensions are different. And again, I could type in any dimension I want, or I could type in proof grade thickness, and then it's automatically going to be the same thickness as the other. And when I come in and I change my parameter back to 3 millimeter, you'll see that they both change. Awesome. Last thing I'm going to show you guys is how to do something more complicated, right? And so the first thing we're going to do is bring in the Glowforge logo and show how we're going to sketch that. So I'm going to go and make a new design, and just like before, I'm going to insert a canvas using the back face or the front plane. I'm going to select an image that I downloaded of the Glowforge logo, and I'm going to check the display through, and I'm going to reduce the opacity. I'm going to go into front view, zoom in quite a bit, and I'm going to go under my origin to the front plane and say create sketch. And we're going to do very similar to before. I'm going to create a line and drag it down vertically. This one is going to be the center line, so I'm going to hit the letter X or hit the construction symbol there. I'm going to drag this over so it's in the middle. And now my origin and that line are going to lock together by the coincident feature. And now I'm going to use circles because I could look at this logo, and to me, it's a lot of circles, right? So I'm going to start it about here, and I'm going to drag it out, and I'm going to move it down a little bit, and I'm going to drag it out some more until it looks about right. And now I'm going to set a dimension to this thing. And it looks to me like the size of this circle is about 14.5. Good enough. Cool. I'm going to take this, the end of that line and this circle, I'm going to set them to coincident. I'm going to drag this back down. There we go. And then I'm going to take a line, and I'm going to start a line right around here at the bottom of the logo, and I'm going to drag it off over there. But just like before, I'm going to take this line, and I'm going to take that circle, and I'm going to say I want them to be tangent to each other. Again, that means that they're going to touch each other right there. Tangent. And then I'm going to go and trim the end of that line, right? Because I want it to end right over there. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to take this, create a new line. I'm going to drag it off into space, take that line, that circle, make them tangent. I could hit T for trim, and this time click right there. And then I could even trim the circle itself. And now I wound up with a teardrop shape, which is awesome, right? By the way, I probably want a 90-degree angle between these parts, right? If I measure this, visually it looks like 90, and I see 92, and maybe I could just set this to 90 exactly. Now this thing is looking really good. I could even set a dimension for the entire size of this part, and it's yelling at me. It's saying that I already actually have all the dimensions I need to be able to put that in there. If I say cancel, no big deal, I move on. If I say okay, it's going to put a dimension with these parentheses on it. And all that means is that when you change other dimensions, it's going to update this, but you can't double click on this and change it. That's all the driven dimension is telling you. But maybe I'm going to set a dimension from here to here. Oh, also that's over constraining it. So I'm just going to leave it for now. Let's leave that. We're going to double click this entire thing and say I want to sketch offset, and I'm going to drag this in here, and it looks to me like this is about a 1 millimeter offset. So I say 1, enter. I'm going to do the same thing again, and I'm going to drag it over to here. This is about a 3 millimeter offset. I'm going to do it one more time, offset. I'm going to drag it all the way in, and this is about a 4 millimeter offset. And now I'm looking really good. I'm looking really close, like I have my logo spot on to what it's supposed to be. I'm going to hit L for line, and I'm going to drag a line from this area here to about there. And notice, by the way, that this line is so close to touching this origin that it's probably supposed to touch, right? Like especially when you bring in images and you see dimensions are close to whole numbers, they're probably supposed to be. And if a line, it looks like it's matching, it's probably supposed to match. So I'm going to make that match. Then I'm going to take the whole line and I'm going to offset it. And it looks like 1 millimeter gives me that other line. So that's awesome. And let's see what else we could do. I think I'm going to do another offset from here. Oh, nope, I'm gonna take this line and I'm gonna offset it. We're about there, and it looks like this should be about 3. And now I'm starting to get myself something really awesome, right? Now, not all of this is matching perfectly, so we're gonna have to do some trimming, right? So let's open the trim command. I hit the letter T again. I'm going to hit this one to make that go away, this one to make it go away, this guy, this guy, this guy, that guy, here, here, and there, and it's already looking better. Let's keep going. Trim this away, trim that away, and let's trim that away, this away, and we're looking great now, right? Not perfect, but we're looking great. Let's take these lines and extend them instead of trim them. So I go under Sketch, Extend, and now it's perfect. Extend, we're gonna extend it one more time, but now I still have something here that I shouldn't. Excuse me, I'm gonna trim that as well. Now that's looking great. Let's clean up this area right here. Let's trim this away. Excuse me, I'm coughing, just a moment. We're going to extend this line to the end. I see something there that shouldn't be there, so let's actually go and trim that as well. This is looking fantastic. Now I'm also seeing I probably should have, this should be rounded, and so let's put another circle here. I'm gonna go and make a circle like this, and I'm seeing that this circle and this line are probably supposed to be tangent, so I make them tangent. Now I can come in here and do a little bit more trimming, trim that away, trim this, trim that, trim this guy, and that guy, and now I'm looking really good. One last thing, I believe on the real logo, they have some rounded edges here as well. And so I'm gonna go and pick a fillet command that's under Sketch, fillet, and I'm gonna pick this corner, this corner, this one, and this one. And that's looking great, hit enter. I'm gonna come in over here, and I think this is the very last fillet. And I think this one should be size 1, that's too big, 0.5, perfect. And now I have, let's get rid of the canvas, a perfect Glowforge logo sketched from scratch, right? And the key here is you see how inside the logo turns yellow, and when I highlight over it, there's like black edges? That means that it's a perfect profile, and I could use that to extrude into 3D shapes. So for example, I can turn this into a 3D thing like that, or conversely, I could actually go and create a new sketch of maybe a box, right? Maybe I'm gonna make a box and have a Glowforge logo in the center. I can come in here and make a box. Perfect. We're going to make a new body, and then I'm going to reorder things a little bit here. This is where it gets a little bit more advanced. So what I did was I made the logo, and then I made the logo extruded right into a 3D shape. Then I made a box. But I told you earlier that we can reorder things in our timeline. So I'm going to move the sketch of the box to be earlier in time. Just literally dragged it over to the left. I'm going to drag the extrude of the box over to the left. And now all that happened was I made a box and then the Glowforge logo. That's the only difference, right? I know it sounded all complicated, but that's the only difference. But the benefit is that now, instead of making the Glowforge logo into a new shape, I can actually take this and go the other way and change this into a cut, and I can cut this Glowforge logo into my box. Does that make sense, everyone? I know you can't answer me directly exactly, but I hope that makes sense. Again, by being able to have a parametric CAD environment, of being able to take step by step, make one thing, use it in another, you can actually come in here and make very complicated objects really quickly. So for example, I made myself a name badge, and I did that all in Glowforge, and this is super simple, you know, nothing really crazy here. And I had the following steps. Let's see here, let's go under the modeling environment. I made a sketch. Show it. There we go. I made a sketch of my name badge. Let's go forward in time. I turned it into a 3D name badge. I then moved that name badge to an angle so that it actually looks like it's at an angle. Then I went ahead and turned it into a component. I then made a sketch of, let's see here, a little thing that's going to hold it up in space. I take that thing and then I turn that into a 3D thing. And you can go on through the list, turn that into a component, simplify it, make it more complicated, and then suddenly you end up with a 3D thing that you can use to actually laser cut. Now, we're at the end of our hour. We went over a lot of information. Our focus today, if I look back at the agenda, right, was to give you an intro to Fusion 360, an intro to parametric CAD. Again, that's the ability to draw a sketch, turn it into a 3D thing, and then go back and edit the sketch, which then updates the 3D thing, right? That's pretty awesome. Or to be able to update one piece of a sketch that updates all the rest. That's also pretty handy. Then we did a pretty deep dive into sketching, right? Primarily using images to form as the background for us to actually draw the sketch of the images. Now, we did not end up getting to our bonus. We did not end up going over vector import and export between Fusion 360 and Adobe Illustrator. I will make sure to cover that next time. So let's go over what we're gonna see next time if you guys join us. Hold on, my PowerPoint is going a little crazy on me. Let's try this again. For webinar number 2, we're going to be going another deep dive into sketching. And again, the reason is because sketching is so important to being able to design in 3D. And so I am going to spend a little bit more time on sketching itself. And we're going to turn our sketches into a 3D object that's stacked layers. So this image you see in the corner here is an image drawn by a badass industrial designer colleague of mine named Chad Lockhart. He's absolutely amazing. And he drew this up, this antelope head for us. We're going to turn this into a 3D thing, and I'll show you how to do that and how to export it. On webinar number 3, we're going to be, oh, by the way, webinar number 2 is going to be live on Monday, November 20th from noon to 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Webinar number 3 is going to be on Wednesday, November 22nd from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And on Wednesday, we're going to show how to take an existing 3D model, whether you design that 3D model yourself or you downloaded it from the internet, how to turn that into layers that you can laser cut and how to split those layers up and how to reorient them, all those slices, into a single plane for you to send to your Glowforge. Right? There's a lot of info. I hope you guys enjoyed so far. I hope you guys are excited about coming to webinar number 2. I'm going to take this recording and I'm going to post it online for all of you guys if you want to re-watch it, or if you were not able to attend at all, you'll be able to watch it online. Thank you guys so much for attending. You know, the only last thing I'll tell you guys is Glowforges are finally shipping. They are getting really close to sending all of them out, at the very least for the first 31 days of our campaign. I am excited to get my laser cutter. I know that you guys are excited to get yours. And so thank you guys for attending today. And please make sure to practice Fusion 360 from now until the next webinar. Take what we did today and actually practice it. You know, take a simple project and start to sketch on top of an image. That's the best way to get really good. And remember that Illustrator and Fusion work together to be able to make really great things. I'd recommend using them together and not just using one or the other. They each do different things really, really well, and putting them together gets the best end result. Again, thank you guys so much for your time. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Is it something that you would want to go back to? Whoa.